Tonight on Ukraine Today, the aftermath of a Ukrainian strike, what's left of Russian jets at the Mariinovka air base. Grom-1 missile bomb, what we know about Russia's latest weapon intercepted by Ukrainian air defense. Russian summer offensive, why the Telegraph says it's failing and what's really happening at the front line. Ukraine exits the Ottawa Convention, why did we return to anti-personnel mines? A 500% tariff. Trump thinks it's time for new sanctions on Russia. All this and more in today's episode of Ukraine Today. Hi there, we're from Ukraine. My name is Volodymyr Robchun. Subscribe, leave a like and let's go. New satellite images show what's left of the Russian Su-34 jets on the Mariinovka air base after a Ukrainian strike. Photos taken just days before the attack show the aircraft sitting near the runway. But on the June 29th images, you can clearly see signs of destruction, including scorch marks that may indicate the detonation of weapons mounted under one of the planes. 15 Russian military trucks with Kadyrov's fighters have arrived in temporarily occupied Mariupol. According to reports, they might soon be heading toward the Zaporizhzhia region. This is the largest unit of Kadyrov's troops recorded in Mariupol since 2023. Once again, it proves how heavily militarized this temporarily occupied Ukrainian city has become. Russia's summer offensive is failing. That's what the Telegraph reports. Why the optimism? And what's really going on at the front? Let's take a closer look.
The Russian offensive lost momentum just a few weeks after it began. This is reported by The Telegraph. Analysts from the publication have calculated that the pace of Russian advances has dropped significantly since the beginning of the month, and on some sections of the front, it has even come to a complete halt. So, experts claim that the number of attacks on Ukrainian positions has not decreased, but there have also been no successes in the past couple of weeks. After passing through the grey zones, Russian units ran into well-fortified defensive lines of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, and they are unable to advance any further.
Overall, we are seeing certain signs of stabilization, meaning that the enemy is unable to achieve even tactical objectives on many sections of the front, although the situation remains difficult.
The situation remains most difficult, as usual, in the Donetsk direction, especially between Pokrovsk and Kostiantynivka. The Kremlin no longer hides the direction of its main attack, having concentrated maximum effort and virtually all available reserves there.
Let me make it clear to you, as I have many times before. Capturing the Donetsk region and the breakthrough directions are of course Pokrovsk, Novopavlivsk, Toretsk, and over the past day there has also been an increase in activity there and in Chasiv Yar. These are several strategic points where they are concentrating all 110,000 of their manpower, as well as a large number of strike assets, including drones, missile systems, and they are constantly deploying KABs. They have also redeployed anti-aircraft missile systems again.
The Institute for the Study of War believes that this summer Russia will not be able to come up with anything new and will essentially continue the spring offensive that has already begun. Nevertheless, experts know that in addition to all the existing directions, Russia wants to add the Zaporizhzhia direction as well.
Our command is aware of this, and we are preparing counter-strikes in the areas of Zaporizhzhia, Tokmak and Starobodanivka. They are trying and will continue to try to attack. But we are ready on our side, and we are already openly talking about it. In other words, the enemy is no longer hiding anything, so we are deploying all means for counter-strikes at longer distances and then directly on the front line.
Our military is also managing to hold the situation on the Sumy direction. Having completely stopped the advance of Russian forces here, the Ukrainian Armed Forces are even managing to launch short counterattacks themselves. At the same time, the situation here was stabilized also thanks to holding part of the bridgehead in the Kursk region.
The enemy's best, so to speak, assets are their airborne troops, air assault and parachute regiments, and accordingly high-level firepower. That's why this sector has stalled, and the enemy cannot continue to develop offensive operations and is suffering new losses. Now Putin is asking for new contingents from North Korea, up to 10,000 more troops to be sent there. But so far, Kim Jong-un has not decided, because he sees that many are dying.
Another direction where Russia is losing dozens of assault groups daily remains the Kupiansk sector. However, soldiers on the ground report that even here the enemy is making no progress. Despite essentially having an advantage in both manpower and weaponry, the lack of experience among the newly mobilized assault units allows this pressure to be contained.
The enemy having such a colossal superiority in some breakthrough areas, the force ratio can reach 1 to 7, 1 to 10, and this is no secret either. Nevertheless, they are not achieving the kind of success that such overwhelming superiority in manpower and resources should have guaranteed.
At the same time, apparently after counting their losses in the Russian Federation, they decided to stop relying on technology and chose to fight using only manpower. The armed forces of Ukraine note that in 80% of assaults along the entire front line, soldiers have stopped being provided with motorcycles and vehicles. And obviously there's nowhere left to go anyway. It's long past time to forget about advances like those at the beginning of spring, when the occupiers would rush across entire fields on ATVs and buggies. The situation has been stabilized on a global scale.
Overall, if we're talking about movement in certain sectors, there are advances of several hundred meters, but we are keeping the situation under control. And accordingly, the enemy has no prospects, despite Putin's claims that he has offensive potential and will use this as leverage against negotiators in Istanbul.
At the same time, it brings to mind the recent words of Commander-in-Chief Syrskyi, who said that Ukraine will not spend the whole summer sitting in a deep defense. So most likely, after the front is fully stabilized, it will be the Ukrainian Armed Forces from whom we can expect advances.
Ukraine is fighting for freedom. Support independent Ukrainian journalism so we can keep telling the truth about Russia's war. Click the link in the description to become our sponsor. And don't forget to like the video and subscribe. It really helps. President Volodymyr Zelensky has signed a decree to withdraw Ukraine from the Ottawa Convention, which bans anti-personnel mines. The reason is quite clear. The convention limits Ukraine's ability to defend itself against Russian aggression. Russia, the terrorist state, is not part of this treaty, and it uses anti-personnel mines widely in this war.
This is the signature style of Russian murderers, to destroy life using every method they have: chemical weapons, ballistic missiles, including mid-range ones, and various types of mines, including anti-personnel mines. Of course, we see how our neighbors in Europe are responding to this threat, and we also understand how complicated the withdrawal process is when it happens during wartime. We are making this political move to send a clear signal to all our partners about where the focus should be. This applies to every country along Russia's borders. Anti-personnel mines are unfortunately often the only available tool for defense.
This weekend, Ukraine faced massive Russian attacks. Strikes hit Lviv, Kryvyi Rih, Zaporizhia, Kremenchuk and Cherkasy region. Russia launched over 500 drones and missiles of various types. Most were intercepted by our air defense, but some did get through. In one of those battles, an F-16 pilot, Maxim Ustimenko, was killed defending Ukrainian skies. He had already shot down 7 targets, but while taking out the last one, his jet suffered serious damage. He managed to steer the aircraft away from populated areas, but didn't have time to eject. President Zelensky has awarded him the title Hero of Ukraine posthumously.
Maxim Ustimenko had been fighting since the early days of the war. He mastered 4 different types of aircraft, and his combat record includes truly important results for Ukraine. It's painful to lose people like him. My condolences to his family, friends and fellow soldiers. Eternal memory.
Ukraine's air defense has intercepted Russia's newest Grom-1 Thunder 1 missile bomb. It was aimed at the city of Dnipro. What do we know about this new weapon? The details coming up.
The city of Dnipro is now in the crosshairs of a Russian missile bomb. On the 28th of June, Russia attempted to attack Dnipro with a guided aerial munition.
The explosion that was heard in the suburbs of Dnipro was the work of our air defense. I thank our sky defenders for shooting down the latest Grom-1 missile bomb.
The Grom E-1 glide bomb with a jet engine traveled more than 100 kilometers before it was shot down. As noted by Ukrainian military experts, this is not the first time such a weapon has been used.
These bombs have already been used. They were first used against Kharkiv and Kupiansk. That was in the fall of 24. So they hit residential buildings and caused heavy civilian casualties.
The Grom E-1 is a hybrid between a missile and a bomb and belongs to a small line of guided missile bomb weapons known as Grom. For example, there is also the Grom E-2 munition. It doesn't have a jet engine, but it does have an enlarged warhead. Moscow first showcased a member of the Grom family back in 2015. This means that by now the Grom munitions could very well be in serial production.
The warhead of the Grom 2 is 480 kilograms. So it's a trade-off between the power of the warhead and the range. Either you have an engine for greater range or you don't have an engine and get a larger warhead. As for guidance, it's like standard KABs. Either an inertial guidance system or orientation via satellite navigation like GPS.
The technical specifications of the Grom launched at Dnipro are as follows. Its weight is almost 600 kilograms, with more than half of that 315 kilograms being the warhead. The maximum range under ideal conditions is 120 kilometers. The ideal conditions for release are a bomber altitude of 12 kilometers and a speed of 1600 kilometers per hour.
It would be difficult to shoot down the Grom in the engine-equipped version because they have a high speed and fly at a great altitude. For example, they can simply pass through certain areas of anti-aircraft fire. If it's dropped from 12,000 meters, the bomb keeps descending, but by the time it drops to 3,000 meters, the altitude at which anti-aircraft artillery is effective, it may have already flown past the positions of the anti-aircraft guns.
When it comes to countering such Grom bombs, the situation is the same as with Caps. It's difficult to shoot down such munitions, but not impossible.
It's extremely difficult, it's a struggle, but now quite effective countermeasures are being developed, and currently there are already effective means being used against KABs.
That's exactly how war evolves. For every enemy weapon, a countermeasure is eventually found. If standard means of protection don't work, Ukrainian engineers come up with and develop new ones.
Trump believes it's time to ramp up sanctions on Russia. That's according to Senator Lindsey Graham, who spoke on ABC. He introduced a bill proposing a 500% tariff for any country that buys Russian energy but doesn't support Ukraine.
Yeah, I was playing golf with him. He says, it's time to move your bill. There's a waiver in the bill, Mr. President. You're in charge of whether or not it's to be implemented. But we're going to give President Trump a tool in the toolbox he doesn't have today. After the July break, we're going to pass a bill that would allow the president.
He's going to sign it.
Yeah, I think we're in good shape. But he has a waiver. It's up to him how to impose it. But we're trying to get Putin to the table.
Meanwhile, the US has lifted certain sanctions that had blocked Russia's Rosatom from building nuclear reactors in Hungary. That's what Hungary's Foreign Minister, Petr Szijjártó, claims. He says these restrictions were imposed during the Biden's administration. If that's true, we need to understand why. Lifting sanctions only helps prolong Russia's war against Ukraine. But strong, consistent sanctions and new ones actually weaken Russian aggression. Because in the end, it's about money. According to Ukraine's Foreign Intelligence Service, Russia is even considering a full ban on gasoline exports. Since the early 2025, fuel prices in Russia have gone up by over 25%. But experts doubt that a ban will quickly ease the pressure on the domestic market. And here's the key part. Putin is now being forced to cut military spendings. And for the first time, he admits it. The full story ahead.
The Russian dictator Vladimir Putin has been cornered by the very war he started.
We have a good saying, right? It means they see the speck in someone else's eye, but don't want to notice the log in their own.
And this log is so massive that the bunker dweller, groaning and coughing under the flashes of dozens of cameras, is forced to admit that the Russian economy simply can't keep up with the military-industrial complex.
The significant and substantial increase in spending on military objectives and the pervasive militaristic frenzy that we have just mentioned and discussed are all fundamentally based upon a singular and undeniable premise: the perceived aggressiveness of Russia and its actions.
And this aggressiveness has a catastrophic effect on all of Russia. The scale of it becomes clear as soon as you look at the list of those who are actively sounding the alarm. For example, the Minister of Economic Development of the Russian Federation stated that Russia's economy is on the verge of recession, while the head of the Ministry of Finance, eyes cast down in embarrassment, called what is happening an economic cooling. Even Elvira Nabiulina has admitted that the resources, which once allowed Russia's economy to grow rapidly, have been exhausted.
This is, among other things, and not least, the result of our joint efforts.
Recently, demand for almost all goods has been falling in Russia. Experts say that people are losing interest not only in major purchases, such as apartments or cars, but even food consumption in the country is sharply declining.
Every sector of the economy is affected to some extent, some more, some less. These 3 years of sanctions are having an impact, and that's why the data for the first quarter already show a negative trend. And of course, while there is not yet a recession, stagflation, that is, high inflation combined with the lack of economic growth is already evident. So the next stage is a recession.
On top of everything else, Russia is facing a shortage of qualified specialists. Analysts note that this problem is so serious that it affects almost every sector of the economy. For example, in agriculture, the Kremlin is short at least 300,000 additional workers. In manufacturing, the shortage of specialists is nearly 2 million. According to reports from the Minister of Labor, Russia is in dire need of mechanics, builders, metal workers, and other skilled tradespeople. But instead, Putin is preparing more and more soldiers.
Yes, our expenses today are not small, they amount to 6.3% of GDP. Is that a lot or a little? I think it's a lot. This is, of course, one of the problems, including for the budget.
But here again, Putin is being deceitful, shamelessly manipulating the facts. As always, the bunker dweller tries to reassure the population.
Now, regarding the expenses themselves, 6.3%. Is that a lot or a little? 6.3% of Russia's GDP for defense needs is 13.5 trillion rubles. And our entire GDP is 223 trillion rubles. So is 13.5 out of 223 a lot or a little?
It's not hard to figure out how much the war in Ukraine unleashed by the Kremlin is really impacting the economy and the wallets of ordinary Russians. Just compare the price tags in stores. Lately in Russia, those prices change almost every day. There is probably nothing left on the shelves of local stores that hasn't increased in price by 10 or 20% just in 2025 alone. And all of this becomes an unbearable burden on the shoulders of ordinary Russians.
And now no one asks them whether they want hundreds of thousands of drones to be produced, for example, right? This money is simply taken from their pockets without asking, and then spent thoughtlessly, burned, destroyed, with no benefit to the people.
And economic analysts warn that things will only get worse from here.
Sooner or later, everyone will inevitably realize that every single drone destroyed by the brave Ukrainians, every tank burned, is a direct and significant loss for every Russian citizen.
And we're not talking about tens or even hundreds of thousands of rubles that every Russian is already missing out on today in the form of pensions, social benefits, subsidies, medical services or salaries.
By analyzing just 4 sectors, the gas industry, metallurgy, coal mining, and direct losses from the war, meaning, for example, destroyed equipment, lost fleet, lost central bank gold and foreign currency reserves, and so on, we have already reached the figure of $2 trillion and have even surpassed that amount. That amounts to about $14,000 per person. So in just 3 years, Putin has lost an amount for each person comparable to $14,000.
And that includes the elderly and children. It turns out that if the Kremlin hadn't started a full-scale war in Ukraine, every Russian family could have already received a brand new apartment over the past 3 years. But instead of that, Russian citizens are left only with the bunker dweller's promise to rein in his military fervor, though not right away and not by much.
The most important thing is that we are planning to reduce defense spending. For us, even next year and the year after, for the next 3-year period, we are planning, although there is no final agreement yet between the Ministry of Defense, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Economic Development, but overall everyone is thinking in this direction.
But as we know, thinking and doing are two completely different things. And the actions of the Kremlin dictator speak far louder than any of his words. According to experts, Putin started talking about reducing defense spending once again just to create a smokescreen and shift the focus. In reality, however, Russia is actually increasing its military production, for example, manufacturing more of its own aircraft at the Aviation plant in Kazan. According to satellite photos, the Russian Federation has prepared almost 19,000 square meters of hangars and plans to fully complete the commissioning of these facilities right by 2026.
The results of our work cannot fail to satisfy us. They satisfy all of us.
Meanwhile, in public, the bunker dweller insists on the opposite and tries to put on the mask of a peacemaker.
For Putin, of course, war in the Middle East is actually a good thing for him. And of course, when he also comes out and says that he will act as a mediator, it's precisely to prevent Putin's nightmare, namely a Trump-Iran deal, which would involve signing a nuclear agreement. For Trump, this would mean lifting sanctions on Iran, which means Iranian oil, not just those barrels, but all Iranian oil would enter the market. This means there would be an opportunity to replace Russian oil.
However, the Kremlin's plans are not destined to come true. Just as the 18th and all subsequent sanction packages are inevitable for Russia, so too will the conflict in the Middle East, no matter what Vladimir Vladimirovich wants soon come to an end, analysts are certain, which will lead to an even greater drop in the price of black gold. Then the Russian military-industrial complex will definitely come to a halt, but not by order of the bunker dweller, rather in spite of him. The Kremlin will simply run out of petrodollars to fund the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, sign contracts and pay death benefits. And without that, as is well known, no one in Russia will agree to keep fighting.
That's all for today. Thank you for being with us. We read your comments and we feel your support. Strength to Ukraine's defenders. Glory to Ukraine. Don't forget to like, subscribe. See you next time.